you seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and today I'm going to review a comic that kind of ties in on both the videos I released yesterday. I'm going to review Rorschach, issue 1 from DC Black Label from Tom King, obviously inspired by the works of Alan Moore's Watchmen. Rorschach being pretty much a standout character. And I hope you're all excited for today's DC Comics comic book review. Now, some of you may be surprised. To me, this is a 4-star comic on the verge of a 4.5-star comic book. Highly recommend. This is actually an excellent comic book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Is this the best Tom King comic book issue he's written since Mr. Miracle? I don't know, maybe. Probably. This is like a really, really solid issue. It's kind of strange. Like, he wrote Batman for 85 issues. Yeah, he never wrote like a pulpy detective story, which is essentially what Rorschach is. This is a pretty good pulp detective story. It's in the Watchmen universe. We know that Tom King did say that this was going to be, very political in nature, and is going to all be about his anger towards the current political times. And there's a tiny bit of that here in issue 1. I think that that'll pick up in the further issues, but I can only judge things by what we have here. And this is actually an excellent comic book. Like I said, 4-star comic on the verge of 4.5. Maybe I'll change the score by the end, but highly recommend. This is a damn good comic book. People were probably surprised to hear that after yesterday's video talking about what Tom King did in the Pages of Strange Adventures #6. If you haven't seen that, I suggest if you've never seen Wes do an angry video or an angry rant video, that's about as angry and ranty as I get. Doesn't happen very often. And obviously, we have been talking about Alan Moore and his disdain for the comic book industry, and that has a lot to do with his work on Watchmen. He didn't want sequels. He didn't think people should be playing in his sandbox, although DC Comics technically owned it. So Tom King's playing into this time. Not obviously, because I haven't mentioned it, but the artist is Jorge Fornes, an artist I personally like. He's got a nice throwback style that I think will fit this character nicely. And I was correct. And the color artist is Dave Stewart, and he absolutely knocks it out the park here. This is a very moody and well-executed comic book, basically on all levels. It's well-executed on writing, terrific art, terrific color, composition of the page is all very good. So before I get into the details, I do want to say, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this review, give me a thumbs down if you don't. Either way, definitely go into the comment section. What are your thoughts on DC Black Label's Rorschach issue 1, Tom King stepping into the Watchmen universe? I imagine there will be some people, like I said, surprised that I'm giving this a highly recommend. I don't normally like Tom King comics, although up until last issue, Strange Adventures have been okay. There have been a couple highs, a couple lows, but for the most part, have been readable. Which is a different take after Heroes in Crisis and the end of Batman. But getting into it, we'll talk about the art first. It doesn't really show it here, but I really like what Jorge Fornes does here. I remember he was the fill-in artist for Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky, which if you're not reading, you're crazy. It's like the best ongoing comic in the industry, in my opinion. It was very different feeling than Marco Cicchetto was doing, but I remember when I was looking at it, it was like, this feels like it was illustrated in the era of Frank Miller. This feels like from the 80s, a nice throwback era of Daredevil. And I was like, man, this guy should be like on some classic characters, maybe in a period piece kind of comic book. And this very much feels like that. It's not like Doomsday Clock, where they're kind of paying homage to the Watchmen universe and all the things that Dave Gibbons did, and it looked like you could tell they were trying to make this as an homage to Dave Gibbons. There's very good art in here. Jorge Fornes is not trying to homage Dave Gibbons per se, but he certainly is trying to homage the time period in which that comic was created. The artwork, the styling, and the color art from Dave Stewart all kind of feel like they're celebrating that time period, which, there was a great change in comic books, and it looks like $1,000,000. He does a lot of interesting things with panel structurings in this comic book. Obviously, you're expecting a lot of 9-panel grids. Not really. Was there any of that? There's some 12-panel grids. I think there's like some 15-panel grids. I don't think I remember seeing a 9-panel, but what he does a lot with his compositions, there's like overlapping pieces, and it almost feels like not like jigsaw puzzles, you know what I'm saying, where you'd have little pieces and they'd connect, but it's like they're puzzle pieces, like they're overlaying, and sometimes they're always in a different layout and structure, like you're trying to put something together, or the narrator or the main protagonist of the story is kind of doing that. I thought it was really effective. This is a detective story, so I thought that was a cool use of the real estate for Jorge Fornes. Dave Stewart does a really cool job with the colors. They're very, I don't know if I want to use the pastel. They're kind of pastel, you feel like fall. Like that's the tone that you get from the pages in this comic book, and it's very wonderful throughout. Fits Rorschach as a character, fits the story. Although it is interesting, I'm going to get to it because it looks like it's in one time period, but it's not the time period we're in, and it gets a little confusing. But that might be because we're in the Watchmen universe. Oh, excuse me. So getting into the story, and they get kind of right into it. This is the first page on the left, and you see Rorschach. He's running down a catwalk that's above a convention, and he takes, looks like it's 5 or 6 bullets, one to the face, which makes it hard to identify who he is. And they bring this detective in. He's the man in the cream colored suit, and he's the man for the job. And they're like, hey, we're at this, the presidential election is coming up. I can't remember. Is it, I believe it's a man named Charlie is running against President Redford. And there's this assassination attempt. There's like there's somebody calls in a tip, and they thought it was a hoax at first. They go to investigate it. Turns out it wasn't a hoax. There is a sniper up there. There are 2 snipers. This man that is dressed up like Rorschach, but he can't be Rorschach. Rorschach hasn't been seen since the end of Watchmen. Of course, they can't probably confirm that he's dead, since I believe he was incinerated. Probably no evidence of his body left in this world. And then his co-conspirator was wearing this cowgirl outfit with a little mask on. It turns out she is a 19-year-old woman. It turns out he is an 80-year-old man. They identify her pretty quick, but we'll get to the IDs. But they are unable to identify the 80-year-old man, and that is essentially the mystery, or at least the beginning mystery. They do solve it by the end of this issue, and the mystery kind of grows with it. But that's what this is. This is a mystery comic book. This is a pulp noir detective comic. Why he didn't do something like this with Batman, I'll never know. He wasted so much time with pretentious feelings Batman. And it turns out he could probably write a pretty darn good, or at least the beginning of a good pulp noir detective story. If that is your kind of story, I think you're going to like this issue. I don't know that we're going to love Rorschach as an entire run. I haven't read a run of Tom King's yet that I thought he finished well, but he does often start things off tripping. So talking about the detective, what is interesting is I don't know his name. The reader does not know his name. He's obviously he's the point of view character, and I believe that's probably the reason that you don't have his name, is so you can relate to the character, or maybe you can feel as if you're the character in the moment, doing this investigation, seeing the clues, getting the stimuli from the outside sources with your coworkers and things like that. So that was pretty interesting. I do not know who this character is. And then when you look at him, like he's using the pager. This is supposed to be happening in 2020. Do people use pagers anymore besides like drug dealers? Do drug dealers even use pagers? They probably use burner phones. I don't know. And then he goes out there and he's using a phone, and he's using a landline, like a mobile payphone. There's another part where they have to play back a tape, but it's like a reel-to-reel. this is supposed to be 2020, but like none of the technology feels like it's 2020. The color palette doesn't feel like it's 2020. It feels like it's the 70s. Even the haircuts. All he needs is a nice big mustache. Be Magnum PI. I don't know. So that is one of the interesting things. Because of what happened in the Watchmen universe with Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan turning his back on humanity, did technology regress or not continue progressing at the rate that it did in the regular DC Comics universe? Is that a possibility? I don't know. But this is certainly technology that would be foreign to a lot of younger people, a lot of people, the Gen Zers. Be like, what the hell is that? I've never seen a pager. Maybe in a museum once. So this is interesting. It's certainly done by design. It's like you notice it as somebody, you living in 2020. You're like, that's a beeper. That's a landline. It's all very, very strange. But this is in the original universe, and I wonder if perhaps we're going to find out that the events at the end of the first story by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, perhaps something happened with technology or advancement, or maybe I'm overthinking this, but it certainly looks and feels like you're in the 70s in this comic book, not in 2020, which I thought was very interesting, or maybe the 80s. Definitely not the late 80s. It'd be early 80s or 70s. Just the way the people are dressed, the color tones and everything that you get, which I found to be very interesting. Now, moving on, remember I did say, Tom King says this is going to be political in nature. It's going to be like his referendum on his thoughts about the current political climate. We know originally, Rorschach's point of view was like Ayn Rand. I think he was supposed to be. I think Alan Moore said it had something to do with like Steve Ditko. He's that was kind of where the point of view of the character came from. But this version of the character is supposed to be like that, but the exact opposite, like 180. Be kind of like a far left kind of zealot. I believe that's what it's saying. But there is a lot of symbolism about what we're seeing here, and I guess it's hurt some feelings. There was like a really weird article. So I guess, I don't know, is it a women's comic book webpage or something? I don't know. They reviewed it. It was like, oh, this is offensive. This is dangerous. This is problematic, which I think is funny because, Tom King is a simp, but I don't know. I guess this is problematic. But we do see some things in here as far as symbolism. Like there's a sign that says America for Americans and come the conservative revolution, vote Turley. Maybe that's supposed to, vote Trump type of thing. This is obviously the Conservative Party's convention that they're infiltrating, that they have the sniper out there, obviously planning on some type of assassination attempt. So there is a little bit of symbolism in through it that may hearken to, make America great again, MAGA type stuff. Maybe. I can barely say it, but I guess if I weren't strictly, basically in the center, right leaning in the center, maybe if I was on the far left, this would seem like heretic to me, or something like that. Heretical, something like that. Or maybe if I was on the far right, I would find this offensive. But it seemed pretty innocuous to me. I thought King would be bringing it a little bit more than that. So there is a little bit of symbolism talking about the current political climate. It's not nearly as intense or pervasive as I imagined it would be after Tom King's interviews leading up to Rorschach. Another interesting bit here is when they're investigating the Rorschach character, and they cannot figure out who he is. They want to investigate the mask. They're like, this isn't like the original mask that changed shapes. That would have been very helpful. We probably would be able to track that down. This is just one of those Rorschach masks you get, in any dime store, like Halloween's, costume shop. And I thought like this was like a meta commentary on like when Watchmen came out in the 80s, like it was groundbreaking, revolutionary idea for comic books. It was, it was like almost mind blowing. But in today's climate in comic books, this is commonplace. This is the inspiration, essentially, for a vast majority of current comic book writers. They want to deconstruct characters. They want to be writing in something that feels like the Watchmen universe. So it's commonplace. Anybody can get their hands on that type of material. You know, it wouldn't have felt as outrageous or maybe dangerous as when Watchmen came out the first time. And I thought this was kind of what that was symbolizing. You can just get a Rorschach mask anywhere. It's no longer a big deal. It no longer represents what it originally did in the story. I did see an article, and I can't confirm this because I never watched it. It said this was they felt this actually confirmed that the events in the HBO Watchmen universe are canon into DC Comics. I believe they might have even cited this part even after Oklahoma. I'm not sure. I never watched it. I don't actually plan on watching the HBO HBO Watchmen series. It didn't interest me. I don't really watch a lot of superhero TV shows. So that might have happened. Obviously, I couldn't say that because I'd never watched it before. I actually can't comment on it. But there is that. I have seen that out there. But that's not the way I interpreted this. I thought this was like the mass commercialization of Watchmen and how accessible it is. And, you know, it's no longer special. It's in every, dime store, costume shop in America or in the world. That's kind of the way that I took it personally. That was the symbolism I got with this. But other people, I guess, are seeing some type of connection with the Watchmen HBO series. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this about the commercialization of the Watchmen universe, or is this canonically tying in the HBO Watchmen stuff? I don't know. I would love to hear your guys' opinion because I haven't watched it yet. So as we get to the end of the story, we do find out who the character is. And like I said, there's a reel-to-reel, and it's the conspirators are talking. They're trying to, connect with ghosts and stuff like that. And like there's a reference to Frank Miller. He's like one of the conspirators, Otto Binder. Some interesting stuff in here. But this is where they find out who the man in the Rorschach outfit is. His name is William Myerson. Apparently he was an actor on something called Pontius Pilate. Or he was an actor that wrote something called Pontius Pilate back in the 60s. I guess it was a comic book or something like that. And so they know who he is. He's like 80 years old. In 1974, he disappeared from the face of public. He went into his apartment and never came out. They said, but he might have went to get groceries, but that would have been about it. He was a shut-in for the last 45 years or so, something like that. It's interesting. His age wouldn't exactly line up with Rorschach. So who is William Myerson? Apparently he was an artist, and we see some of that imagery up here on the top right. Like I said, this one's what is that? That's a 15-panel grid. Over here on the left, there's a 12-panel grid. Like I said, we do see some of those things. I don't think we see a 9-panel grid. But at the end of it, there's the big mystery is they say that, where is it? There's a collector here in LA that does costume hero stuff, got a Manhattan thong, all that. I helped him out when he got something stolen a while back. In 86, Walter Kovacs goes to Sing Sing, gives his prints. Everyone thought they got burned up in a riot, but this collector had already actually bribed a guard for the prints of Walter Kovacs. And they actually were able to get their hands on the prints from 1986 from Watchmen, from Walter Kovacs, the original, and they checked them against the body that's dead, and they match. So is William Myerson actually Walter Kovacs? Is he the original Rorschach? I guess that's the big mystery. I thought the mystery is who is Rorschach, this dead person. They identify who he is. It's William Myerson. But who is William Myerson? Is he the original Rorschach? He's got the fingertips to prove it. He's not the right age, but technically, Rorschach was looked to be vaporized. Maybe Dr. Manhattan sent him out and brought him back, and he was aged up. I don't know. I guess that'll be the kind of the big detective story in this. So it was a pretty cool reveal there at the end. Like I said, this is a pretty cool, like pulpy noir detective comic. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. I really like the art. I like Jorge Fornes a lot. I think he's really good. His style fits what they were trying to do here. It does feel like a 70s comic book. It feels like it's set in the 70s with the color palettes from Dave Stewart, with the art from Jorge Fornes. You know, it does get a bit wordy here and there, which Tom King is normally pretentious and uses a lot of lyrics and stuff like that. I would ever say his. Well, no, never mind. His comics do get wordy, so it's a little wordy, but it is, you know, it's a detective comic. It's supposed to be a bit wordy. You're having to pass a lot of information, and a lot of things are going on here. So, like I said, I maintain this is a 4-star, highly recommend comic book. Very excellent start for the series. Do I have high hopes that it's going to finish off as well as it started? No, not really, because I've read a lot of Tom King comic books. He doesn't know how to finish a story. If this was 6 issues, I would say he'd probably bang it out, but it's 12 issues. He always runs off course the last half, which is starting to happen with Strange Adventures. You should watch that video that I did yesterday if you haven't yet. If you want to see Angry West. So I did enjoy this a lot, though. This is the best issue. This is the best Tom King comic book issue that has been released in at least 3.5 years. Like, this is really good. And if you expected, you know, politics to be hit you over the head, it's not really in here. There is, you know, mention here. There's a passing mention of fascism and some political motivations, but they don't go into it. Nobody takes a stance or anything. There's a couple of pieces of symbolism in there, a couple of references to it, but mostly, like, who is this guy? Who are these people that want to assassinate this presidential candidate so close to the election? That's the big mystery. Who is it? Is this the original Rorschach? We shall see. But, you know, I think this is definitely worth it. This is a good comic book. Kudos to Tom King. I do not always like your work, but this is a very good start. And I really wish you had done something like this with Batman. This would have been a much better, you know, like a pulpy noir detective story. It would have fit Batman. That is who that character is. So it's a little bit, feels like it was a opportunity lost, but he's kind of picking it up and working it here. Alan Moore's not going to be happy, folks, but that is the way it is.